A few weeks ago, I made my video talking about the major things I felt Ghost Recon Breakpoint did right, because this game had an extremely rough launch, and I felt it got much better over time, thanks to some good updates and changes that realistically should have been in the game from day one, since all of them were already present in the game's predecessor, Wildlands. However, while Breakpoint is far better and an enjoyable experience now, I'd say, there's still many fundamental issues that couldn't be fixed through updates, and some of those may be problematic enough to keep people from still playing the game. Now, thankfully, this isn't as big of an issue as it was on launch, since we now have the immersive mode, but the gear scores and hyper-focus on collecting loot was a huge turnoff for so many people, especially Ghost Recon and tactical shooter fans. These are mechanics that belong in a game like The Division, not Ghost Recon. Every piece of gear has a score or level, there's different rarities and tiers of weapons and clothing, and to collect this loot, you have to loot them off enemies or open the unholy amount of different chests scattered throughout the world. It's very RPG-like, and Ghost Recon is one of the last series that should resemble an RPG or looter shooter. They took what people loved about Ghost Recon and what made it unique from the dozens of other shooters out there, and made it into the most generic third-person shooter possible with these mechanics. I brought this up in my last video, but the new Suicide Squad game from Rocksteady showcased very similar systems with gear scores and different rarities of loot and all that. It's already received horrible backlash because of that and has been delayed. Thankfully, it seems Ubisoft Paris has learned from this critical error, and thank God for the immersive mode, or this game would still be dead in the water. But arguably the biggest issue with Breakpoint is actually its open world. Auroa is an incredibly bland open world, and it's a bummer because I think the concept was cool. Being stranded on this insanely deadly island where you have to overcome and adapt to survive. The concept sounds really cool, but the world itself is bland, barren, lifeless, and there's hardly any environmental variety. Seriously, so much of this world looks exactly the same. When you compare this world to Bolivia from Wildlands, it's just not even a competition. Bolivia is everything Auroa isn't. Auroa lacks any of the life that an immersive open world should have, the extreme lack of NPCs, culture, or sense of scale. I mean, this game doesn't even have a radio when you're in vehicles. Driving through this world is boring because the world itself is so bland. I understand that it's under military control, so you're not going to see a lot of civilians or other cars driving on the streets, but it really kills any chance at making this world feel lively. It's even smaller than Bolivia too, which normally wouldn't bother me. I don't mind smaller open worlds as long as they're dense and filled with life and things to do, but how are you gonna have a smaller world and have it be more empty? The aesthetic and general look of the world is also far more boring than Bolivia. I'm not sure how you managed to make a deadly island with crazy futuristic tech and these advanced soldiers hunting you down boring, but they did. Oh, and that's another thing. It would have been nice if you actually felt like you were being pursued throughout the game. Wolves show up and find you a few times, but it's not very often, and not usually too hard to survive. There's a lot of things wrong with Auroa, and it's my personal biggest issue with the game as a whole. And again, it's not something that can really be fixed because of how it was designed. This is kind of a smaller issue in the grand scheme of things, and some people may actually like this, but personally, I really hate having all the different drones in the game. For me, they're not fun to fight, they're just annoying, and having to deal with them in stealth sections was a major pain. Again, I understand why some people might like them, but I find them more annoying than anything else, and I'd prefer if it was just human enemies. It's kind of the whole plot of the game with Jay Skell and all his futuristic tech though, so they sort of have to be in the game. That kind of goes for the different tanks and everything too. Although some of them can be fun to fight, a lot of them are very bullet spongy though. I'm just not a big fan of it personally. Another issue that can perhaps be overlooked by some players is with the story and characters. A lot of this game's story is very forgettable to me outside the stuff with Cole Walker, and it feels very Ubisoft, if you know what I mean by that. To be fair, Wildlands' plot felt a bit like this too, where it doesn't take itself quite as seriously, and it falls on a lot of Hollywood military action tropes and quirks. It can feel a little campy sometimes, and I think that's kind of an issue with a lot of modern Ubisoft games, but I definitely noticed it in Breakpoint. And again, outside of Cole Walker, many of the characters are one-dimensional and forgettable. Even the main character Nomad felt a little more one-dimensional and didn't have much personality like he did in Wildlands. They even changed voice actors, which I know isn't a huge deal, but I really dislike when games change voice actors for already established characters. For Nomad, I suppose it's not as big of a deal since you can customize them to look however you want, but yeah, almost all of the characters in this game feel dull and forgettable. John Bernthal as Cole Walker hard carries this narrative in my opinion. And of course, another recent Ubisoft trend is inserting microtransactions into their games, and Ghost Recon Breakpoint got it pretty bad. If I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. Microtransactions don't belong in $60 or $70 single player games. Breakpoint had some of the most extensive microtransactions I've seen in a Ubisoft game yet. But that about concludes most of the major issues I have with Breakpoint. As always, let me know down in the comments what you feel Ghost Recon Breakpoint did wrong, and if I should do these kinds of videos for Wildlands next. I think that could be fun. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like and considered subscribing to the channel if you're new. And other than that, thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day, everyone.